Hello again. You're very welcome to Fate Matters. I'm David Hennessy. Over the last several months, most of my guests have been from the United States. But today, I'm delighted to be welcoming a man close to home, my friend and neighbor by just a few miles, Johnny Masterson. Johnny and his wife Linda began a prayer group in their home 18 years ago. The prayer group is still going strong today. Back in the day, if you had told Johnny he would someday start a prayer group, he would have said you were mad. But the Lord does amazing things in our lives. More often than not, he has to get our attention first, and that involves a struggle. But now I let Johnny tell his story himself. Well, Johnny, thank you very much for coming in to see us. Would you tell me your story, Johnny?
Yeah. So basically, I was born in Gorey, 1971. Grew up in a household. My mother was very devout Catholic. My father, not so much. Um, and basically had a normal childhood, a regular childhood enough. Played a lot of sport, GA, badminton, basketball, and so on. Yeah, in 1994, I went to Australia. And, a couple of guys, we emigrated out to Australia and we, worked and traveled around and spent a year and it was great. Came back, started to work in Ireland. And then in 1996, I was, cousin brought home a motorbike from Australia and we decided to go out one Sunday morning. Um, Take this bike for a spin. So I got up on a motorbike just outside of Gorey there, and I went down the road. And to be honest with you, I was actually showing off because all the guys was down and looking at me at the road, and I came down the road like a bat out of hell, for want of a better word, and I was going too hard to take the corner, and I came off the motorbike, and I broke my right femur, and it was called compound fracture. It came out through the side of my knee. And I ended up in Waterford Hospital and spent 2 months in Waterford Hospital and had about 6 or 7 surgeries. I nearly lost my leg through infection. What I was told in Waterford Hospital, I was told that I'd never be able to play contact sports again, like GA or basically the way he told me was it was like be like bringing the family car rallying. So that was devastating. I was 2 months in hospital and eventually got out. I was 15 months on crutches.
How old were you then, Johnny?
I was 24, and basically that was the end of my sport career. However, 'cause I love sport, like so I had nothing to do with myself, so I ended up start going out like a young guy do when I got back well, going out into town, having the fun. And because you didn't play sport, which means you didn't be, you didn't have to be watching yourself because you were training and stuff. So I kind of lost the run of myself. Uh, Started to drink, really heavy, and started taking recreational drugs and I thought the best thing of life was to spend in the pub of a Sunday or and just look out at the world go by and then I started to take recreational and drugs and this went on for a couple of years like really I thought this was the life I thought but I was really kind of cover up basically um that I couldn't play sport and this was my way of filling in the gap of that like so I thought it was normal enough. This is what life is about. So I I met my wife now in a nightclub, and uh, she was out going out together. And after 3 months, she fell pregnant, like, and um, I was a shock for both of us, like, so. Look, life went on, and I was still drinking heavy, and I went out to the pub one night, and I was coming home and I went in to stop in to get a bag of chips. And I met this guy in the pub called Kevin Lacey, who used to bring out trips to Medjugorje. And I had heard my wife talking about him a few times, and my mother had been out to Medjugorje, and he knew I was going who I was going out with, like Linda, because Linda used to help pack boxes for Bosnia with him, yeah, our charity, my wife, and he said he was talking about Medjugorje, and I went home and Linda wasn't out tonight because she was 3 months pregnant, and I said I met Kevin Lacey out there, and Kevin Lacey are in the chippers, and Kevin Lacey said was talking Medjugorje, and I said, she was, oh yeah, she started talking Medjugorje, and I said, sure, book a ticket or we can go to Medjugorje, you know. Um, sure, I had too many drinks in me, and so the next day, Linda ran with it anyway, and she booked the trip to Medjugorje, and but I came home, she said she booked the trip for Medjugorje, and I was going, Jeannie Mac, what am I have to let myself in for? Oh, because I thought, obviously she wouldn't have done anything about it, but she did. So she booked a trip from Medjugorje. So I said to myself, anyway, she'll look at, I'll go out there and sun and I'll have a few drinks and, I just, go along with it. And I happened, my mother was actually going on the same trip. So the time came anyway, and I kind of dreading it, I was kind of going, Jeekers. Anyway, I said I go along with it anyway because of I said I get the few beers and the crack. So I went out to Medjugorje and we landed in Medjugorje or in Dubrovnik. And we came out and got on the bus anyway. And I'll never forget, we walked onto this big bus, and I walked down the bottom of the bus, and there was this circular table, which I've never seen one on the bus before, actually. It was a circular table, and there was a couple of older gentlemen sitting around the table. And I sat in beside them anyway. And next minute, they whipped out the rosary beads. And I looked at him and I was going, what are they doing with this? What are they going to do? So, Cheekers, I said, right, okay. So they started to pray the rosary, and I got up and I moved off, and I got the camcorder out, and I said, well, I'm not staying down there. No way, no how. So that was grand. Anyway, we got down at Medjugorje. I was enjoying the scenery going down along the coast in the Dubrovnik. It was really beautiful. It's spectacular. And we got to Medjugorje, and I was driving by and I seen all these outside, you know, tables, and it was lovely weather and people having a beer. And I was going, oh, this is going to be great. I had a few beers. So we arrived in anyway, and we went up and packed in and went down. We had a look around and walked around and went over and had a beer. And then I was sitting down. My mother was actually on the trip, and I was sitting down. I was happy enough having a drink anyway. So we went back to the house anyway, and I remember Linda saying to me, you know, really and truly, Johnny, so to get the graces of Medjugorje, you have to go to confession. And I was, you know, I knew what confession was because I was an altar boy, and I served in St. Michael's in Gorey there. So I knew what confession was. And hadn't been for donkey's years. And I was going, well, I'm not really going in there to tell somebody my sins. And then I go, I tell you what I'll do. I said to myself, I go in and I'll tell him the usual stuff. Bless me, Father, for I sin, took the Lord's name in vain, told a few lies or cursed a bit, I wouldn't tell him any of the stuff about the drink or the drugs or any of that carry on. I just tell him what he wanted to hear just to get out of it. So that was the next day we went to mass and stuff like that, and sure, we headed over for the confessional anyway. And I remember walking down to there was a line of confessions boxes, like, and I was going, wow, and there was queues outside of them, and I was going, I was kind of a bit blown away by all people queuing for confessions, so many of them queuing, and there was about 10 doors. And the next one, the door opened, and I could see the priest's face, and I turned around to Linda and I said, where's the slidey thing? The thing that you slide over, Like, he's going to be looking straight at me and I'm going to be looking straight at him. I said, I can't go in there. Like, and she was going, no, you need to kind of go in, you need to go in. And I was going, and I stood in the queue, and I said, I can't believe I'm actually queuing for confessions. Just 6 or 8 people in front of me, and I never realized, what the value of confession was. And, I was kind of thinking, "Oh, okay, I go in here now." So I remember going in and kneeling down in front of this priest. And his name was Father Philip, by the way. He was actually the leader or the head of the English speaking pilgrims in Medjugorje at that time. And I knelt down in front of him anyway, and I said, "Okay." I signed the cross and blessed my father for his sin. I said it's been whatever 10 years, whatever it was, since the last confession. It was probably more anyway. But I was I felt under pressure at the time.
Yeah.
I said, I went through the normal things, as I said, I rattled off the same things, and then he started to ask me a few questions about different things, and what about this commandment or the sin, and I was kind of going, oh yeah. And next thing I was blurting out all this stuff. I was blurting out all the things, and I said, I'm actually living with my girlfriend, and he went through me like a dose of salt. For want of a better way of explaining it, like, and I was like our deer in the headlights. He was just, and spouting out all this stuff about things I'd done, and I didn't even at the time. I didn't even know how to make an act of contrition, like because I had that long. I kind of remember the child's one, and I still use the child's one to this day. The child's act of contrition, like, um, because it's very simple and very easy to remember. So I helped along with act of contrition anyway, and he gave me my penance, which was a Divine Mercy chaplet, which I hadn't got a clue what that was.
He said for penance
Yeah, for
to
penance.
Divine Mercy Chapel, and you didn't know what it
I
was.
hadn't a clue what Divine Mercy was, and chaplet for penance. And I went out, and I remember walking out, and Linda was walking in, and I said to her, "You're in some trouble. I'm after get you're in." So she went in anyway, and look at Linda went in and knelt down, and more or less she was 3 months pregnant at the time anyway, and of course she more or less alluded to basically, and he goes, "Ah, I see," because he connected me and her,
Yeah.
you know, because we weren't married at the time, and look at we were living the life of what we thought was, or was the right
The
life.
couple. Yeah.
Yeah, so we came out anyway and went off anyway, and we had something to eat, and I think I had a couple of beers, not major, a couple of beers, and we were walking around in Medjugorje and and I was looking at all the people and was going like, God, these are half mad. We're Roger hanging out and praying, and I always believed in God, but I always thought God was for when you were older, not when you're young. You know, I was never an atheist. I never didn't believe that there wasn't a God, but it's thought, time enough for that, maybe, or maybe not. Like he wasn't at the forefront of my mind or anything. So we went back to where we were staying that night anyway, and you know, I was in the bed and I went fell asleep anyway, and all of a sudden I had this vision, and the only way I can say it is that like Our Lady appeared to me in this vision with her arms down to her side and open wide, which I hadn't got a clue at the time who, but it was Our Lady of Grace, and I heard this music, and the only way I can describe it is it brought me so much peace I've never felt before. Like I had taken all kinds of different recreational drugs, like so, I knew what I felt like to be, high, in regards to that. Like, but the peace I felt from this was just, there was nothing on this earth could ever compare to it. Like the peace that I felt. And I heard music. And the only way I can describe the music is it was like every strand of my DNA was intertwined with every note of music. It was so intimately connected that it's the only way I can put it into words what I've what if I've actually the closest I've heard to it was a composer who composed a song of Our Lady of Guadalupe, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Using the stars.
Using the stars, and that was the closest thing I actually ever heard to what I heard that night. And the peace I felt and there was people walking toward Our Lady, and some people were falling off the cliff, and some people were walking towards her, and I still don't understand what that really meant to a certain degree. Maybe it was, I don't know what it actually meant, but all I do know is that I had never felt anything like it. And the next thing, I started to convulse in the bed, like like having a fit, an epileptic fit. I started to
Convulsed
convulse,
in
yeah,
bed.
in the bed.
Were you asleep when this?
I was asleep. I was asleep when I started to convulse, I was awake, like, and
Oh, but the vision you had, you were
I
asleep.
sleep. Yeah,
It
I
was
was
very
asleep.
vivid,
Oh,
so much vivid. It was so vivid that you still remember it
oh
today.
yeah, to this day, yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
You saw Our Lady with her arms,
her arms down by her side and her palms facing out, which is Our Lady of Grace.
Our Lady of Grace. Yeah, that's the way the miraculous medal. Is that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, and like nothing can compare to it. Absolutely nothing will ever compare to it. And I started convulsing the bed, and I turned around to Lynn and said, "Will you hold me? Because I'm afraid." Like, and I don't get afraid of many things. Like, there's not too many things I get afraid of. But I didn't know what happened. Like, I knew what happened, but I didn't know what happened. If I know it's a bit contradictory, like, but
the convulsings last.
it didn't last very long. It probably lasted about maybe 10 seconds, like,
Yeah,
and then it stopped. Like, and I've never had ever since or before anything, it's like that. Like, so I woke up in the morning and I knew that things were different. I just knew that God exists, really exists. And I remember going down and I met my mother, and my mother was always never underestimate a mother's prayers,
yeah.
because my mother prayed for me all her life, prayed for and all of us, like, um, and she, like, people say, oh, my kids are gone south, and they're not doing this and that. Never stop praying for your children, mothers and fathers. Never stop praying for them, because you keep praying for them, the Lord will look after her. But I met my mother anyway, and I gave her a big hug, and I said to her, "Now I know what you've been talking about all these years."
You said that.
I said to my mother,
Now I know
"Know what
what
you've
you've
been
been.
talking about all these years about faith and God." Um, and I went to the rest of the week, and I got to the Divine Mercy Chapel, and we done our penance. And people say about confession, oh, it is, for me, it was one of the greatest releases of everything that day in the confessions. I can't speak about it enough, because people think you don't need to go. Why would you need to go? Because it's not the priest that absolves you from your sins. It is God through the priest. And you have to look beyond the priest, because without that, because I went and I confessed my sins, and then I was given the grace of this vision, and that's exactly what it was. It was grace. So we went through the rest of the week, and like my wife had been there before, like, and she led me around. You know what I mean? Like, she was like, we're converting to hope. We're still converting to this day. We're still converting. Like, so we went around, and look at. I came home from Medjugorje and back into Ireland, and it was like coming from a silent room into a rock concert. That's the only way I can describe it, because the noise of everything in the world, like, this is the world we live in. This is the noise where out there with so much peace and quiet and all that I felt. And I came back into the world, and straight back into what we're living in this world. But the thing about it is like, I knew something had changed. I knew something had changed, but I go, how do I integrate this into my life? And it was like two steps forward, one step back. And it's a continual journey of conversion.
Did you continue drinking at the same level?
I continued drinking. Yeah, I not. Yeah, I did. I did continue drinking, and slowly, 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 like, I started to pull away from that life, um,
From the pub and
from the pub and from everything. Because I remember being in the pub anyway, and telling some of the guys about what happened to me, and they said to me, "What were you on?" you know. And I said, "No." Like, I said, "No, not like, I had a couple of pints, like, but like, obviously they couldn't, they couldn't understand it, like, yeah, and like, as I said, I was talking to you earlier on there before this, and I said the hardest thing in the world is to be a Catholic or a Christian, especially Catholics as well, because the hardest thing in the world is because of the more you know, the harder it is to live in this world. And I say that out loud because, I'm a work in progress, and so is my family, and so is we're moving along forward.
And
Where,
Johnny, getting back to when you came back from Medjugorje, you continued seeing your friends, obviously, because they were your friends,
hmm.
and going to the pub. And how long did this, how long did you sort of continue at that rate you were going, and how much did it slacken off? Because,
Well, it's look, it still continued, but obviously because it still continued. Obviously because Linda was pregnant, like things had things gradually went back, was pulled back, like, but also because I knew, like, but like oh God, it took a couple of years, David. It didn't just happen
yeah,
overnight. Like, it wasn't just this oh God moment, and everything just stopped, and I became, I just went into my fate. Like, it was a gradual thing, slowly, 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 and then the more I learned about my fate, and the more my wife helped me, and the more we followed her fate, and the more I started getting involved in it, and the more I realized that if I could give advice to anybody, would be this: is see the world through Christ's eyes, not just your own eyes, and you can have it all. You can have the 10 All Irelands, you can have the successful job, the marriage, the kids, the
you can
house, the
have the
whole.
pint, you can
You
have a
can
good
have a
pint
pint,
and enjoy it.
you can have all that stuff,
Yeah,
as long as you have it with God.
yeah.
If you take God out of the equation, then you have to have the balance. And I didn't have that balance. But it's taken years to find that balance. But you can have it all. I tell my kids that, like, you can have it all if they have God involved. God at the top of your life, you can have everything else can come with it. It's not something that's far fetched out there, but it's something that's attainable. Like, if you put God first, you can have everything. And the beauty of it is, instead of looking out through a pub door, you can enjoy what God creation. You can enjoy everything if you look through His eyes, not just your own eyes.
And Johnny, I wanted to go back to that moment when you had that convulsion.
Mm.
Um, have you ever figured that that must have been some kind of liberation, that you were being freed from something?
Yes, I do. I believe it was the Holy Spirit, and I believe it was because how do you explain something that just happened here and never happened before or after this? It is not, and after what you saw, that is not divine inspired, like that. It's not, that it's basically God saying to you, I'm here.
And tell me, when you met your mother the next day,
Mm.
um, did she notice anything different about you? Did she say anything when you said what you've always told me? You're right. You told your mother she was right. Did she say anything about you, or did anybody comment anything about you afterwards?
I think, to be honest, she was shocked, because she knew where I came from, you know. She knew where I was. She knew that when they were going to amputate my leg, if that infection didn't subside, she prayed all night. And her actual prayer was, and I remember her telling us, she prayed to the Lord and said, Lord, if they're going to take his leg, you take him on the operating table because he won't be able to live without his leg. That was her prayer. And the next day, that was a miracle in itself, because the next day the infection subsided and they didn't have to take my leg.
A mother's prayer.
A mother's prayer. So yeah, but no, like, she was a bit shocked, and then she gave me a big hug, like, and you could see it in her eyes. You could just see it in her eyes, because like so many families, like a lot of, well, parents don't follow or some follow their faith and some don't, and the kids, a lot of kids don't. They're young and they go down the road and they don't have their faith. So she was looking at one of her children, going, that she'd prayed for years, going, wow, so it was shocked, like, I suppose. When I say shock, I was like, you could see in her face, like, you could see the joy, and you could see that, you probably could see her thanking God, said thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's all we have time for today. Don't forget to tune in next week at 8:30 to hear the continuation of my conversation with Johnny Masterson. If you're enjoying this conversation, you might like to recommend it to somebody you feel it might help. You'll be able to find it in all our previous interviews on my podcast, David Hennessy, Finding Happiness, on YouTube, YouTube Music, Spotify, and my website, drbhennessy.com. Well, for now, take care. Don't forget that Jesus loves you. Good night now, and God bless.